Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to Simulation Pulse Live. I would like to introduce our guest. This is Simulation Pulse Live is Pediatric VR Simulation Month here. So we've been doing a lot of different pediatric type activities and guests joining us next Friday. We're going to have Dr. Jeffrey McAdams or Jeffrey Jacobson joining us from Boston Children's Hospital at noon Central. And today we have a very exciting panel discussion. Again, I hope Dr. McAdams can get in, but until then, I'm going to introduce Dr. Trinh. Had the incredible pleasure of working with Dr. Trinh on this project that we've been doing. She's been conducting research with Dr. McAdams and has had the opportunity to present their work at multiple conferences. And she and Dr. McAdams also, I'm told, have had a paper accepted for publication, which hopefully Dr. Trinh can share more about that. And additional research is being done on the use of VR for international simulation, which they're hoping to publish next year. But Dr. Trinh is a neonatal-perinatal medicine fellow at the University of Wisconsin Hospitals and Clinics. And I hope I have that current. If it's not, then you'll have to update me. I don't know. I think I took it from LinkedIn, so hopefully that's still right. But I think I know you've been looking for other opportunities, so I don't know. You can hopefully update us on that. But I've seen our customers in Acadicus do some pretty incredible things. But I have to say that joining a simulation that Dr. Trinh was running from Vietnam. So she was in Vietnam and she was facilitating and interpreting a neonatal simulation as she and Dr. McAdams here in Madison joined. And seeing someone handing a laryngoscope to somebody that's like 8,000 miles away, I think is something that I'm never going to forget. That was pretty incredible. So you can learn about that project here. I'll share a link with everyone. So that is that project. And then here is a link to McAdams research group that has a little bit more information on that. So that is Dr. Trinh and of course, Dr. Nick Slamon. So I have known Dr. Nick Slamon for a very long time. I actually met him at IMSH in January of 2019. So it's been 5 years. Dr. Slamon is a pediatric intensivist at Nemours Dupont Hospital for Children in Wilmington, Delaware. And, at trade shows, when we launched Acadicus in January of 2019, you talk to a lot of people, just hundreds of people. And Dr. Slamon was someone who came to the booth and immediately understood what we were trying to build and had a lot of questions for us. But he went out and bought his own VR hardware out of his own pocket very shortly after we met. And a few weeks later, he had emailed and said, come into Acadicus, I want to show you something I've been working on. And he had created a 3D recording of a demonstration and had been running that with his residents. And what was really cool about it, I think, for me and for our team, was that he did that without any help from us. Like, he rolled up his sleeves, learned how to use the tools, and built a simulation that he was able to make use of. So that was pretty incredible to see that. And then he and his fellows on his team studied and published a paper in the Curious Journal of Medicine called Virtual Reality Simulation for Pediatric Airway Intubation Readiness Education. And I'm going to share a link to that. And Ryan's here. Hang on one second. I'm going to get him in here. Sorry for the confusion.
No, okay.
I am all...
It was the wrong email. So
wrong email? Okay. I'm positive that the issue is on my end. I am on a learning curve with Zoom. I apologize for that. I appreciate everyone's patience with us as we learn this. But I was just doing introductions and I was just about to introduce you. So perfect timing. We have Dr. McAdams. Dr. McAdams is a neonatology division chief in the Division of Global Pediatrics in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. And there too, if there's any updates to that, you'll have to share that with us. But Dr. McAdams spent 10 years in the Air Force and he volunteered on lots of low-income countries doing global health work. Spent several years at the other UW at the University of Washington in Seattle and Seattle Children's Hospital for 8 years, and now working at UW, the University of Wisconsin-Madison for the past several years. And I shared a link to the McAdams research group and the video that we created together with them on the work that they're doing with VR and Acadicus. And I actually met Dr. McAdams shortly after I met Dr. Slamon. So it was March 5th, 2019, according to my records. You sent the first email saying, hey, I read an article in the newspaper about the work you're doing and we should talk. So uh, absolutely honored to have you all here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Jon.
So I guess, yeah, first of all, I'm really curious to know, we discussed this a little bit last week, but we were curious, there's obviously a lot of interest in pediatrics and VR simulation, and curious if you had any thoughts on why is that the case? Why do pediatrics and neonatal simulation, what's the interest in bringing that into the virtual dimension?
Maybe calling folks. Nick, do you want us to take that first?
Sure. Ryan, nice to see you in a virtual person for once. We haven't met in person.
Yeah.
So good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
I think it's probably not divided along the lines of peds versus adults. I think everybody is in a similar boat in terms of having experience throughout their medical school training, their residency training, their fellowship training, mannequin simulation, which has its place and has a lot of good things that it can do. But for me, at the end of the day, it was always just the fact that it was a plastic mannequin. And you would get a big speech at the beginning of the simulation about everybody has to suspend disbelief and you have to pretend. And I'm just not a very good pretender, I guess, because at the end of the day, I still felt like, all right, the mannequin died and it's still a plastic mannequin and we didn't do our job. We didn't resuscitate it well. And that first IMSH in San Antonio was just eye-opening for me. As Jon said, I met a lot of people and I met a lot of vendors and I tried on a lot of headsets that I had only been in a headset one other time, and it had no kind of medical connotation at that time. It was just, I think, one of the earliest Microsoft things where you're underwater and there's a blue whale, swimming above you. And I was just really amazed and immersed at how like real that felt. And I said, if we could do something similar with medical training and medical simulation, I think we could take it to a whole nother level. And again, for me, I think the arguments that you read in the literature and you hear people talk about that, well, VR can't do this and VR can't do that, those things are true. Doing chest compressions on a mannequin is not the same as doing it on a person, but it's more real than doing chest compressions in VR, which is just moving your hand up and down. So there's definitely, I think, a place for mannequin sim to continue, but VR simulation has so many advantages for me in terms of realism, in terms of immersion, in terms of being able to quickly and expeditiously switch from one place to another within a hospital setting. So I'm in the operating room and then I have to run down to the emergency department and then I have to bring that patient up to the PICU. To stage all that in mannequin simulation is really hard to do unless you have individual rooms that are already prepped to look like all those places. And I think everybody on this call knows that means a lot of money. And there's probably less than 10 places in the country that can do that, where they can roll you from one room to the next room to the next room, and they're all set up the way they're supposed to be. So being able to switch environments, I thought was really important. Being able to have all these different adjuncts that you could use, whether it was a laryngoscope or a chest tube or an IV catheter or a central line, and just kind of being able to click and bring those into the simulation was really important to me. And then I think the other piece was debriefing. So when the simulation was over, when the mock code was over, in the old days, I would hope that I had like a flip chart and some markers or a dry erase board nearby or a chalkboard that I could write something or draw something or put something up on the board. And if I didn't, then it was just talking. So we've been talking during the mock code and we're going to talk some more. And I don't know if people remember what I'm trying to teach them as well without having that visual component. And in Acadicus, it was pretty amazing to just prep a little bit ahead of time and say, all right, well, this scenario is going to be about asthma. And I could create charts and tables and graphs and posters all about asthma. And in, the click of a button, transport people from where we were doing the simulation, which was high stakes and high stress, into a debrief area where it was low stakes and everything was about education, and just kind of click. And here's a graphic about asthma, and here's a graphic about bronchospasm, and here's a graphic about pulsus paradoxus. I know I learn through multiple modalities, not just auditory, but visually and tactily as well. So being able to kind of put all those things together very easily and very quickly was what sold VR for me. And again, it doesn't negate the advantages of doing mannequin sim. We still use that. But VR is really has really advanced my ability to immerse and have a realistic simulation for pediatric fellows, residents, and medical students.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess, yeah, I mean, do either Dr. Trinh or Dr. McAdams want to take that as well? Any
I mean,
thoughts on that?
I think Nick touched on, I think, a lot of the keys aspects. I'll just, I think, reiterate some of that to drive that home. I think the amount of information that you can get from your senses. So if you think of the eye, you know, compared to like reading text, if I look at something, there's from just a numbers perspective, you know, the amount of information that my eye is processing and that my brain is processing is, you know, magnitudes more on a log scale than like written text. So the visual component of VR, I think, where you can continue to work on that and enhance it, can really mimic real life situations. And if you add auditory in, and in the future, maybe more haptics. So just that experience, I think, does feel very different than the mannequin. And I think, you know, suspending your belief of reality is always like an instant limiting factor, like pretend this, you know, and versus like I think in today's world, it's like, well, I shouldn't have to pretend. I can like, I want it to feel real, because the reality is we continue to deal with very difficult situations in the hospital, and you want to get those right because there's a life on the line, and you want to practice in a way that is going to lead to high level performance. We still need to figure out like what exactly that looks like and metrics to show that it truly does what we hope it's doing. But the kind of having the ability to like not just abandon the mannequin, but augment our training. And I think of it, you know, I see Bill's on, and Bill's a big football fan, right? So I won't talk about how the Bills did this year. He's a huge Bills fan. But like if you think about football, right? Like how that has, and I'll just use that as one sport, but you could apply it to a lot of other sports as well, like where we've used newer technology to help understand like performance. So like we use cameras and we measure things differently, and you know, we're using a lot of physics and other things to say like, how do you throw the ball better, or how do you catch better, how do you increase your speed? And I think that is very different than 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Some of the things are still the same, that'd be the mannequin, but these other tools I think can help enhance performance. And so VR to me is kind of this tool that we should leverage its strengths right now. And I think I still feel like it's pretty tip of the iceberg. You know, where there's so much more that can be done. Like Nick said, if I'm going to try and build this out, like in a hospital, like all these different scenarios of like, okay, I want to go from one room to another and this other, to orchestrate that, just the amount of personnel and the logistics of that would be very difficult. If I think of the cost of what it would in a hospital where like, you know, right now, financially, I don't know of many hospitals where like, we've just got tons of space. You want a room, you can have it, you can build this thing. It's like, it's very expensive. Construction costs are double to triple since COVID. And so just kind of like, oh, we want a space to do these sims. That is and we want it on a permanent basis. Like that's almost impossible unless you're fortunate to have a lot of like philanthropy or other types of funding to really drive that. VR can hit a different price point, and it's a flexible platform. I don't need as much space. I can take it anywhere I want. Sarah can talk about, you know, we did this project in Vietnam, so it has global reach in a state like Wisconsin, where we have a lot of rural sites. You know, you just need a headset, and the price for those has come down a lot. I think, you know, the capabilities now I just got the Meta 3, it's wired, like there's no cords or wires. It's a game changer. Like that tech has kind of continued to evolve, and I think it will. I also feel that the future will be blending much more AI and machine learning, natural language processing, some of these techniques integrated with VR. You know, the gaming industry is doing a lot of this, but I think more and more that will be applied to medicine, which will really take it to another level. So I just feel like there's to kind of do things the way we always have, like, and it just seems kind of very dated when you have these awesome tools that you can tap into. So Sarah, I don't know, you know, Sarah's very savvy with this type of technology, and you know, she's taken this to a global setting. So you know, where she did some work in Vietnam. So maybe Sarah, do you just want to add to what Nick and I said? Maybe you're coming at it from a different angle, but it'd be good to hear from you.
Yeah. So I definitely echoing what Dr. Slamon and Dr. McAdams mentioned about like the differences between like virtual simulations and mannequin simulation, and I really truly believe that each of the modality have their own role and have their advantages for that. I think the two things that really like stand out for me with VR is the first one is the emotion part, right? Because as a learner, when I first started out as a neonatology fellow, the part that was hard for me is that I can run the resuscitation with the mannequin without any issues. But then when it's come time for real life, the real stress, the noise, the pressure that like everyone's around looking at you, it just usually like put the nerve on like on me, and it makes it a lot harder to run through the same algorithm that we've been practicing with the mannequin for hundreds of times. And I think that what VR was able to recreate for me, because I still remember like the first time when we had that like fully formed like model that we practicing, like I put on the headset, I start hearing the same alarm that I would hear in the delivery room, with the same kind of noise. I can start feeling my heart rate like start like rising, and it's kind of mimicking that emotions that it's really hard to recreate in a mannequin setting, whereas the room usually look different. They usually no alarms. So the feel is very, very much different. So I think that one thing that like VR has been like much more advantageous for me. And then the other part for me is that I started my training right at the time of COVID. So when I was interviewing for fellowship, that was the first time we do virtual interview, because everything stands still. Everyone is staying at home doing like social distancing. And all of my training since like the last half of my residency kind of came to a pause, because we no longer allowed to do mock code. We no longer allowed to like even check NRP course, because it required you need to go in and be in the same room, and they're usually going to be maxed out like limit of how many people you're allowed to be in the room. So like everything came to a standstill. And then that is when I started to see the rise of virtual simulation or distance simulations, that like people trying to navigate the new world of like a pandemic, of like, how can we still doing simulation when we are not being allowed to be in the same room with each other? And that is when I met with Dr. McAdams on my interview trail. We talk about the virtual reality that work that he's been doing, and I think that it's just like, this is just a perfect like modality that help navigate kind of the challenging world that we are facing. And it has so much more implications, right? If we can do it while we social distancing at home in the same country, what would prevent us from doing it from different places, right? And I'm originally from Vietnam, so like that is kind of the thing that kind of like connected with me, and it the reason why I have been working on this project.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and I know that, you know, all three of you have certainly challenged our team, I think, to, you know, level up and build the kind of content and the kind of features that you need to support your simulation. And that's one of the things we really pride ourselves in, is being sort of, I think of us as a sort of a chameleon, where like we fit in with whatever you need us to do. We're not trying to make it about us. We're trying to figure out, okay, how can we support you? Could you kind of, if we get a little bit of altitude, we've kind of talked a little bit about the general sort of broad nature of virtual simulation, but specifically, what was your first sort of you know, I know the answer, but I want to hear it from you, and I think our guests do too. But what was your first sort of exploration into VR? You reached out to me and you said, we want to use VR. This is what we want to do. Dr. Slamon, could you explain a little bit, what was your initial goal? Like, what did you want to achieve? What was the outcomes that you were after when you started using VR?
So I think that's a great question, John, and it probably reflects a little bit of my personality that I wanted all of it. I wanted everything. So I had seen different vendors, and a lot of them gave off that vibe of the old, choose your own adventure stories, where you could kind of go down a path and make some decisions at key branch points, and that would affect where you would go next. But at the end of the day, even though those books when you were a little kid were kind of cool, at the end of the day, eventually you've read all the branches and there was nowhere else to go. And it just became repetitive, and then you didn't read that book anymore. You needed a new one. And I kind of felt that way with a lot of VR companies that I met, that it was like, well, this is what we build already. You have to use this. I'd say, okay, well, that's great, but what if I want to change it to that? No, you can't do that. Or, sure, you can do that, but you need to pay us $150,000 because we have a lot of programmers and they need to feed their families. And if you want us to build this from scratch, we can. So, my first experience with Acadicus was that I could get everything I wanted. So I could do a virtual reality mock code simulation where I could change the parameters at any point. So if the residents were getting really good and catching up to what I was doing, I could throw a monkey wrench in and make the patient have a VFib arrest. Or if they were, diagnosing that the patient was septic, but they were taking their time in getting there, I could make the patient hypotensive and say, all right, we got to move this along. He's hypotensive now. What do you want to do next? So I had that control. And I think there's some folks that look at VR and say, well, I don't want that control. I don't want to have to do anything. I just want it in a box, and they can learn on their own. Like, go buy your own headset or go into the lab at 10 o'clock at night, put on a headset. I don't have to be there, and you can do your own learning. And Acadicus could do that as well. So with the, auto recording feature, if I wanted to design a tutorial about how the blood flows through the heart and talk about certain congenital cardiac defects where that blood flow may be altered, I could just make my own recording. And then instead of doing, a YouTube type video where somebody would sit down at their computer and say, all right, well, I'll watch a video about how the heart works. They could put on a headset. They're in my video as a member of the team. They're walking around the heart and looking at it in 3D from every angle, up, down, through the valves, out the aorta, out the pulmonary artery. So that to me was so much better than a YouTube video where they might teach the same things. Like, okay, this is the way blood flows through the heart, and these are some congenital cardiac cyanotic defects that cause mixing of blood, and this would happen. That's good, but this was better. It just was so much better, and it gave me everything I wanted. It gave me the flexibility of designing my own mock code where I could change things on the fly. Or if I have a standalone asynchronous learner, it's like, I don't really like the mock code thing. That's a lot of pressure. I just want to learn about this on my own. I could do that for them as well. So Acadicus was just more value for what I wanted to do. And the answers that I got very early on were almost always, yes, we can do that. Whereas other companies I was meeting, and they have great products too, but it was a lot of, no, this is what our product does, and you have to tailor your learning or teaching to what we do. Or if you want to build something from scratch, I guess we could do it, but it's going to take a long time, and get your wallet out because you're going to have to pay us a lot of money to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about you, Dr. McAdams? I remember you reached out, you wanted to do simulation, but we didn't have the content you needed in your case. And I know you were looking for neonatal simulation, and we went in, we did a 3D scan. We actually built a very realistic replica of the delivery room and the resuscitation bay, created that. And I'll never forget, we went in there and you were like, yeah, this is great. Everything looks amazing, but it doesn't sound like anything, and you were like, this needs to sound like activity, chaos sometimes, there's a lot going on. And so when we added in that audio, that was, I think, an important lesson for us that, it's more than just the visuals. We're so focused on the 3D models and the realism of everything, but there was this missing gap. And you immediately recognize it. You put on the headset, you're like, cool, but here's what we need to do. And then when we added the sounds, it was just night and day. It was like a whole different ball game, to the point where, like you say, Dr. Trinh, it makes your heart beat. Like I still, when I go in there and I hear all that chaos and I hear the baby, like I get nervous being in that space. So what was your goal? You were going in, you knew you wanted to build this content. You've already kind of touched on a lot of this, but that initial inception point, like what was it that was driving you into there, and what was your goal? What was the outcome you were after?
I think, like Nick, I was not satisfied with, I think, where we're at, and felt like there could be so much more. And when I kind of had a bigger vision of like what the future could look like, I do a lot of global health. So I visit places around the world where there's challenges to access care. We have that problem in the US, right? We have access problems. It's even more evident when, a villager took 10 hours to, walk in or on a bike to get to the clinic. And that made the difference of a good outcome versus a bad outcome. And so thinking about like accessibility, kind of equitable access for education, and recognizing like an immersive experience is powerful. And, we talk about, see one, teach one, do one, this concept of I can just watch the procedure and then I'm going to be able to teach it and I can do it. That's a very like simplistic, probably unsafe, like simplification of like what it really takes. I mean, some of the stuff we're doing is very complicated. And as visual learners, I think experiencing it is very different. I mean, you and I could watch someone, I could go to a symphony or watch someone play a violin and then go try and play it. And it's like, oh, well, it sounds horrible, right? Like people are running for the exits. And it's because, well, like that's a lot harder than it looked. And a lot of the stuff with medicine, I mean, it takes decades of experience and training to really understand things thoroughly. So is there a way to help people with that process to make it not take so long, have them understand things in a certain way, and have this be accessible kind of globally? And so if you think of like this concept of like, a virtual hospital, and like Nick said, this kind of ever-changing platform where like in the future, like every time you go into that hospital, something could be different, and it could be based off like real world data and information. So there's a reality component to it, just like the sounds, like you got to get it right. So it's like, I believe it. I'm not thinking anymore of like what's wrong with it. I've kind of moved past that because it feels right. So I'm not stuck on the fact that it's quiet. It's like, no, I'm actually like in that experience. And then I can start to take things in and learn in a way that I otherwise might not be able to. And I think it's closer to the ground truth. It's not perfect, but it's a closer step to that. And then I might understand stuff by experiencing it in a way that I just couldn't by watching it or reading about it. And I think to allow access to that, ideally for like anybody, if they can get, a computer and a headset. And I realize that there's a cost to even that, but I see that. And then I was kind of envisioning a future where like, not like an open source model, but like in a way where you'd have multiple sites globally who could contribute. They could participate in a scenario, but they could actually contribute to scenarios. And so like, yeah, this institution built that room and this institution built that room. And this was created by, some high school students or college students in Zambia or something like. And so you have this kind of setting that becomes very rich and robust, and it could have a dynamic nature to it and a real world. So what Nick talked about is modifiable, like where if I build a fixed real structure, concrete and things like that, I got to tear it down and build it. That's really expensive. In virtual world, that becomes much easier. It's not without cost or effort, but there's ways to probably do it that could really make it augmented and make it better. And when we talked a lot, we talked about avoiding too much nuance to start with and having a platform that would be really flexible. And I think of it like it's like the Lego piece that fits with all the different pieces. That's the best piece to have because you can build off of it versus like, well, you got the one piece and the only thing you can build with that is the X-Wing fighter. And so that's great if that's all you're into, but like you may want to do some other things with it. So I think having a platform that leverages the strengths of VR and then that you could expand upon was kind of the vision. But like it's a great entry point for people to kind of immediately feel like, oh, wow, this is exciting. Like, you know, like what Nick's talking about, like when I go to the room where all your stuff is and I can go step into the heart, right? Like I can actually, I took my kids, I'm like, hey, look at you. My son at first was like, that heart is scary, right? You know, it's this giant heart. I'm like, you can actually go inside of it. And seeing how physiology and like being in it, like is so different than like looking at a textbook or trying to understand it. The dynamic nature, I think, is really powerful. So I think when I talked with you, we spent a lot of time kind of futuristic thinking and then thinking about a strategic place to start. That would also be a good model or template for other institutions maybe to mimic. And then down the road, some of that nuance becomes maybe like easier to do, less costly, but to start with the real nuance, then you're stuck in that little corner. So I think a lot of it was, I think, this bigger vision, which you shared with me about wanting to reach people all over, really focusing on education, and then that feeding and the realism and the experience that would hopefully then translate into better patient outcomes. So that to me was like kind of that bigger vision of like what might be possible, which I still, you know, I'm more excited now about it than I was then because I think we've moved along in a lot of other technologies that will complement this and help.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I'm hearing a common theme of this non-locality in some ways. I don't know how else to say it, but like, you know, if you think about like the physical asset of something like, you know, Blockbuster, and we're sort of introducing this digital dimension and bringing it into Netflix streaming, it's like that transformation. It's not that it replaced it, it just brings it to a different dimension, you know, augmenting it. Once we're in that digital world, so many things are possible. You're not all in your own verticals. And I think that's one thing. I know Rick Casteel joined us. He's our customer experience specialist. And, you know, Rick does all of our demos. And I think one thing that he and I have always talked about is just, we talk to people all over the place, you know, and they're all in their own little verticals and they're all in their own sim labs, but they're not really talking to each other, right? There's annual conferences, there's publications, they do share some, but it's still, everybody's running simulations in their own little world. And they're all sort of doing it their own way. And they're all kind of like not sure how they're supposed to be, or there's different ways to do it. But once we get into this digital world, we can all be, it's like a global simulation center where people can be sharing ideas and working together. And so I wonder, like, even facilitating, you know, connections between you, which has always been my dream, Dr. Slamon, Dr. McAdams, Dr. Trinh, get you all working together too. You know, it's part of the value of the Pulse events is just bringing people together and get us talking about these possibilities. But what would simulation look like if we could have multiple, you know, institutions joining together and actually working together from all over the world? It's a game changer. And I think we haven't even seen the beginning of that yet, but a lot of possibility.
So John, just to expand on that, and one other thing that Ryan said that I think is really important. So as you know, at Nemours, we're just trying to finish up a paper on our experience with those 31 mock codes. And, you know, part of IMSH's call out last year at their Congress was that with people who are doing more VR research, there has to be more reporting about cost. You know, everybody kind of talks about it, refers to it in their paper that, hey, the startup cost of VR can be extensive, but eventually there's some savings, but nobody actually puts that into real numbers. They just kind of nebulously refer to it. So I did some digging and I found it interesting. So in 2010, Nemours built their second children's hospital, freestanding children's hospital within an 8-year period. So they had a $500 million bond and they built a 240-bed children's hospital in Wilmington and a slightly smaller one in Orlando, Florida. And the cost was roughly split, that it was about $250 million each to build that hospital, and it opened its doors in 2014. So it's already 10 years old. But you think about it and you say, okay, 240 bed children's hospital, 250 million. So put that into perspective, the folks at the University of Nebraska that has their iExcel simulation center, which I think is probably the best in the world right now. They have a 5-story building that they raised lots of philanthropy, and they've built kind of the mecca of simulation. They have on one floor that central hub surrounded by a pediatrics room, a NICU room, an OR room, a mocked up OBGYN room. They have state-of-the-art mannequins in every one of those rooms that can give birth and change color and talk and have pulses and lose pulses and do CPR and do procedures. And on the other 4 floors, they dedicated space for VR simulation as well. So they have all the tech and all the toys, but I had trouble initially finding out, well, how much does that cost? And I finally found out that that building cost $121 million. So just about half of what it cost in 2014 to build a brand new hospital in Wilmington, Delaware that can serve 240 live patients. They raised half of that to build a simulation center. And what that says to me is that simulation is really important to them because they think it's really something that's correlated with good care. If you have people that can simulate and do it in those circumstances, then they can translate that to actual patients and good outcomes. So it's really important for them to do simulation. The other thing is that they're not afraid to dedicate money to that startup. And it's frustrating to me when I hear people who hear about VR and say, well, a headset costs $500 and a laptop costs about $2,000. And then you want me to let you use one of these empty patient rooms to use it and you want Wi-Fi? That's going to cost a lot of money. Oh, there's a subscription fee for Acadicus. How much is that? Oh, that's a lot of money. Okay, that is just pennies compared to building a $121 million building to do your simulation in. And maybe what you're trying to say to me is that, well, simulation's not that important to us because we don't think it alters patient outcomes, but I disagree. Like, I think everybody in this meeting has proof that simulation does change outcomes. And practicing a dangerous, complex procedure, as Ryan said, on a VR mannequin and learning the steps and making mistakes and repeating those steps and making less mistakes, when you're faced with that in real life, that could save that patient's life, and there's no dollar sign that you could put on that. So I think the startup cost of VR being too high is just nonsense. It's a fraction of what it is to build a in live, state-of-the-art simulation center with concrete walls. And simulation has to be important to your institution. They have to see the value of it to be able to move forward and actually do these kinds of things that we're describing.
Absolutely. That internal buy-in, I don't want to get anybody in any trouble, but I know that trying to get your organization to support the work you're doing can be challenging, to say the least. And we hear this all the time, and we're repeatedly told, don't even try to sell to hospitals. Just sell to the schools, medical schools, nursing schools. They've got the money, they can do it. Hospitals, they're going to be so hard to sell to. And from the beginning, I've felt like that's nonsense. We absolutely need this in hospitals. If anything, we need it more than ever. And part of my vision is a simulation bay on every floor of every hospital where you don't dare touch a patient until you've rehearsed and you've practiced and you've got a sense of what that's going to be like before you go in there and work with that patient. And I've learned that from all of you. That's the value. And I think, but how do you get that support? How do you build that network? Because it's not just, we get people coming in that are really excited evangelists that see it and they love it and they want to do it, but that doesn't really matter unless you can find an administrator that's supportive, unless you have IT that's supportive. And in many cases, honestly, in hospitals, we hear it's IT is always the bottleneck, unfortunately. Money, maybe we can find the money, some way or another, we'll figure it out. But the IT is always like, well, we've got this network and that, I think these are all easily solvable problems, but there's these bottlenecks. What do we do about that? How do you build support? Do you have any ideas or advice or input on that for anybody else trying to do the same thing?
I think you have to recognize there's going to be the counterpoints that Nick brought up, which seem ridiculous, asinine, like Wi-Fi. Really? That's your excuse. Like, it's getting Wi-Fi in a hospital. Like, that's going to be hard. Okay. Like, and yet you'll take a trip into like these crazy remote places and you've got cell service. It's like, okay, Wi-Fi. And then, the cost I mean, we were talking like a renovation of a building. Like, I mean, it's nothing. Even a high fidelity mannequin can be like tens of thousands of dollars, So it's like, I think that to me is almost an easy like counter. Like, it's always like whenever it's money, you can always kind of like, well, you just throw it, whatever. I don't care what it costs. It's just you throw it out there as like a GameStop or a challenge. I think you need to one of the things that I think is needed, and Nick talked about publishing a paper, and there's not enough literature right now medically to kind of convince people of the value of this. And so part of what and I saw this early on, you have to be able to publish and do things in a way that is going to move towards bringing people on board and raising awareness for like potential with them, and knowing it's not perfect and it has a long ways to go. But I think that's important. I also think some of it is just like, if you believe in anything, know that it's an uphill battle. And I don't expect people just to say, oh yeah, let's do it. It's kind of like, I think, have you ever let them put on a headset? Have they experienced it? Have you shown, like, how have you included them in that conversation? And this is one, it'd be like if I talked to you about ice cream for the next 30 minutes, but didn't let you taste it. It's like, well, how about I just give me a dish of chocolate? There's pistachio, there's strawberry, and you're like, oh my gosh. And this is what gelato tastes like. And you're like, okay, I like it. I want some. Versus like I describe it and want you to get us an ice cream machine. You're like, well, why would I do that? I don't even know what that is. And so I think part of it's like, well, get people involved that are decision makers so they can kind of understand what you're actually talking about. This is with AI right now, right? A lot of hospital CEOs, they're having to like understand terminology and concepts. And once again, IT could be like, well, we can't do this or that. There's a lot of pressure though in that realm because it's all over the news. It's like, if you're not doing it, you're in trouble. You better get on board. VR isn't going to have that level of push at the moment. It certainly doesn't, but I think it has a role, like you mentioned, where it has a lot of value, not just with procedures, but even like, how do you navigate a difficult conversation? How do you do some of this stuff where you could practice it? Because if you get it wrong in real life, like kind of what Nick's alluding to, like you only get one chance sometimes with the patient, and that could be like a bad outcome or a death. Like, I don't know many other things where like it's that much on the line. And I talked about sports and training for that championship game. I think every patient is a championship game. That is the Super Bowl, because for them, it's like, it's someone's son or daughter, aunt, uncle, like mother, father, brother, sister. Like, you need to get that right. And there's a lot of pressure, and it shouldn't just be this like, well, it's part of training. And it's like, no, are we actually training the best? Are we optimizing that? For some of the conversations we have, like difficult conversations, DEI concepts, we deal with systemic racism in the hospital, and like, how do you navigate that better? And can you do that and practice that in VR? So I have more confidence when I approach a conversation that I'm going to word things properly. I'm not going to hurt people's feelings. I'm going to say them better. I'd rather mess up in virtual reality than mess up in real life. And especially for a trainee, you're just going to send them in the room, or once again, in role modeling, I saw them do it. Well, that means I'm good at it. Well, no, it took that person like decades to get good at those conversations, and they still could mess up. So I think this is where thinking about, what do we believe strongly what are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? What are the things in the future that might be even better? And then scaling this. And so maybe you don't start with like the whole hospital's going to have it, but maybe you start a little smaller. What's an area of need? Cost and Wi-Fi, that should not be the thing that gets the sticking point. I think it's just really like raising awareness, getting people thinking about it, and then having some champions, like anything else. Like, you're going to champion this and kind of but you need the right folks involved. And I think if you do that, then that thing might blossom and take off, and then it gets really exciting. People are having fun, they're learning, you start studying it, there's better outcomes. I think back to what Nick said, the price point doesn't prohibit you from like piloting this and trying it. And if it didn't work, at the end of the day, you didn't lose as much as like the 120 million you put into that building. Like you're talking like pennies on that. So even like we take risks all the time with like, well, let's try this, let's do this. This is a pretty safe thing. Betting people are going to like it. So I think some of it, Jon, is like, it's kind of a maybe more than you asked for with an answer, but it's like I think you have to bring in some of those aspects of it because it's not just going to sell itself. You have to have a champion for it right now.
Absolutely, 100. I would say showing it to people, like you said, it's so important. They have to put the headset on. They have to try it. I know Jamie Howell's always saying that from Western Technical, just put the headset on. You have to try it. I think that's a great analogy of, explaining ice cream for half an hour without trying it. That's a great way to put that. And involving people in the process is always key from the beginning. Sometimes because, people will think that IT is going to be a bottleneck, they'll avoid having that conversation, right? Well, then we get into procurement and then IT comes in and they're like, well, wait a minute, I wasn't included in it. You have to include everybody in that conversation and helping them understand the value. And finally, the evidence-based practice is so important, especially going into hospitals. I think that's where it really reaches a point where it tips over into that inflection point. Once we have that data, we've got a lot of, there's, obviously you're all contributing to the body of literature here, but, there's a lot of studies that are being done across the board that are really, demonstrating, mind-boggling efficacy, like not even like just, yeah, we were able to incrementally improve this. It's like, no, we're able to like leapfrog, what's going on right now, which is just incredible. So the more data we get, the more research we get, the more use cases and stories, the better, I think. Well, we're approaching the top of the hour. I don't want to take us too far over. I'm just curious if there's anything left unsaid, that any thoughts, I always end with a discussion about, I always want to ask about, what do you see as the future of virtual simulation? I feel like we've already covered that pretty well. I think we've all got pretty big visions for where we want to go with this, but is there anything left unsaid that we didn't talk about yet, or any other ideas or thoughts or insights you want to share?
Well, I do want to look at, I noticed there were some questions in the Q&A.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
gonna,
I'm
maybe Jon,
sorry.
you want to like,
Yes.
maybe Sarah, you can field the first one. So looks like Johnny Neist had asked about any other departments at UW trying to develop this. And so,
I don't think at the moment that there is any other department, at least like in the field of medicine at UW, are trying to work on this. I know Madison College, where Bill works, has been working pretty heavy on this. They have their own VR center, and then I think that kind of our hope for our program as well is eventually we'll get to where we have a dedicated space for like virtual reality and since I'm going to be moving on to my new positions, and our hope is to continue to kind of expand that a little bit to where I'm going to be going and hopefully continue that partnership with UW.
and then I think there was another question about graduate medical education. And, we have, Sarah and I ran like kind of a mini workshop. She gave a talk and we had a lot of the students, the residents who are on the global health track kind of participate. But I think there's a lot of room to get undergraduate students, residents, medical students kind of involved with this. I really see that as a smart move for the future. They're often already tech savvy. They've explored some of this. They've grown up in an era where their games are kind of a normative. And so I think getting some folks like that, you'd like their ideas, like getting them on board and broadening that team, I think would be a really smart move. And there's probably small grants you could do with this, but I feel like this would have certainly a role within training. And if you get the right people to champion it, kind of like Sarah, that you can do some exciting work with this. So I think that's also something. And maybe Nick, you want to talk a little bit about, have you kind of, what your thoughts on that same concept of getting kind of these upcoming generations of future physicians and healthcare providers involved and not waiting till like they're past their training?
Yeah, I think when Jon was talking about dreams for the future, I think we've all grown up in the era where, we went to school with book bags, pencils, and notebooks, and then people started giving out things like Chromebooks when you showed up at high school. My kid, the first day of high school, here's a Chromebook, kid. You're going to use this for the next 4 years. Medical schools, I know, I think it was Columbia about a year ago, in addition to the free tuition that everybody was given, they were all handed iPads on the way in the door. I would love to see, undergraduate medical education be focused in not only the lecture didactic centers that have been done forever, but here's your VR headset when you first sign up for medical school, and you're going to be using this for day one all the way through your clerkships. Please don't lose it. Take good care of it. And, X percentage of your learning is going to be through that headset. And then that obviates the need for all these folks that are just wringing their hands about, oh, well, I don't want to dedicate a space to a VR sim lab. We already have a mannequin sim lab, and that cost us an arm and a leg. You don't need that anymore, because then Dr. Trinh is, in Vietnam, and you're in Wisconsin, and I'm in Pennsylvania, and Bill is in Florida, and we can all say, you know what, we're going to jump into Acadicus and do a simulation today together at whatever time works for everybody across time zones. Everybody has their own headset. Let's just jump in and learn together. I think that's the ultimate kind of dream for VR, is that it's just so ubiquitous. Everybody has a headset. Everybody knows how to use a headset. Oh, there's a live webinar in VR that Jon's putting on. Okay, I'm going to put my headset on. We don't need Zoom anymore for that. We're all going to meet in Acadicus and do a webinar because we all have the equipment to do it. That would be the hope for me.
And I think what's so trippy about that is, unlike even what we're doing right now, so I'm looking at Nick right now on my screen, and I see him. When you're in that same space, like when Sarah and I and the Vietnamese doctors were in the resuscitation, it was such a different feeling. It's almost like
It's real.
were with
We're
someone, like,
together.
but you weren't. Like, it's this weird thing. Like, I know you're halfway around the world and I'm in my basement, but like there's this, I don't know. And that's without even like, imagine once we start to get good avatars, what this will look like. So if, where you scan yourself and it's like, I know Zuckerberg and had done this, I'm trying to think of the podcast guy who he did it with, but they were
Lex
like,
Friedman.
yeah, Lex Friedman, like
Yeah.
with Lex. So they were in the same space, and Lex was kind of like, wow, this is crazy. But I think that's the possibility down the road. And that is so unique. And it's I don't know. I still get excited when that stuff happens. It's not like, oh, that's gotten mundane. It's like it's still really amazing. And I think that to me is where there's something very special about this, that me flying to Vietnam to do that, yeah, that'd be great and really cool. But like, are you kidding me, logistically? Versus like, no, let's do it today at lunch.
It's the next best thing to teleporting. It's
Right.
team training with a person that you've never physically met, but
Yeah,
you've worked shoulder to shoulder resuscitating a 23-week infant
right.
together in the same room at the same time, live.
Yeah. That's just really special. I think that's I mean, obviously we're all biased on this call, but I think for most people, if they were to do that, that is a special component of it that I just don't know how you replicate that otherwise without travel and,
Yeah, I mean, each of us has been together physically. I think, I've been with but I have memories of us in person, but I have memories us in
Yeah.
VR.
Right.
I have memories of us doing helping facilitate a simulation with Dr. Slamon, running a code and having everybody else running around and passing medications back and forth vividly in my mind. I can see that. And that simulation where you were in Vietnam and you were in Madison, like I can still remember the physician. He was counting the breaths on the bag valve mask, I think it was. And I'll never forget. I just remember him counting, and I couldn't understand the language, so I didn't know, but I could tell he was counting, and I was just watching, and you're teaching him like how to do it, and he was responding and asking questions. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget. It's vivid in my mind, and I don't think I would get that if we were just watching a video call, yeah, that's pretty incredible stuff. Well,
Yeah, and that
thank you
gets back
all.
to what I opened with, Jon, with like our senses and how our brain processes all that data. I think that's where a strength of VR, where it leaves you with a different type of memory of a situation, right? And then your recollection of that. And that's where I think what Nick's trying to get at with like, physiology and other things, like by doing it that way, you've learned it in a way that maybe is more memorable and powerful. So I think that's kind of, we want to continue to tap into that part of VR, because that's just an exciting place to be.
Very much so. Well, I appreciate all your time today, everybody joining. This has been a fantastic conversation. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Unfortunately, Dr. Jacobson couldn't join us, but we'll have him next Friday. And but I really appreciate your time. I appreciate our collaborations too. I count you as friends first. I really, we're working together. I'm technically just a vendor, but I don't really see it that way. I think we're all in this
Partner.
together, and I'm learning so much from all of you. It's been fantastic. And so thank you very much for your time, your collaboration, your continued interest in Acadicus and virtual simulation. It's fantastic.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you,
John.
everyone. Have a great weekend.